Very good. Thank you. All right. Thanks everyone for joining us. Appreciate your time today. This is the CROG Regional Warehousing Land Use and Traffic Study. My name is Kyle Scheel. I'm a principal planner with the Capital Regional Council of Governments, and I'm the project manager for this study. I'm joined by Jacob Nolan and Jack Trainer from the CROG team and a bunch of our excellent consultants from WSP. So they were our consultant project partner for this project. They'll be covering the bulk of the presentation. But I just want to provide a little initial background before we kind of get into the findings. One housekeeping note, we're going to hold questions till the end, but if you have some questions as we roll along, just feel free to drop it in the chat and we can address it towards the end during the Q&A section. All right, so next slide, please, Charlie or Stephanie. So the first question is, why do we do this study? Why are we studying warehousing? And I think two particular data points are helpful context. One is this one right here. You can see the share of e-commerce sales as a percent of total retail sales has dramatically increased over the past 25 years. So very steadily. So we're buying more and more things online. Next slide, please. And then another data point I think it's a simple data point, but I think it illustrates it well. The number of people who are willing to pay for Amazon Prime has basically doubled in the past decade. So people who want same day shipping or next day shipping, that is a service that people are clearly willing to pay for. It's something they value. And to make that happen, you need warehouses. Warehouses are an essential part of that ecosystem. So that's why we're looking at warehousing, its impacts on land use, transportation, and economic development. Next slide, please. So there's really two competing dynamics here. People obviously value same day, next day shipping, but they also are kind of struggling with the necessary ecosystem to make that happen. What's the necessary system that makes same day, next day shipping happen? And I think people are starting to get concerned about the impacts of warehousing in terms of transportation impacts, land use, the impacts on rural character, environmental concerns. And you can see some of those sentiments expressed in these signs here, which are from out of state. They're from outside of Connecticut. But if you go to the next slide, please, you'll see that Connecticut's really no different. These are headlines in recent years from our state. People are kind of expressing concerns about the growth of warehousing developments across Connecticut. So this is something we really want to look into as an organization. Next slide, please. So just to provide a little context, I think it's helpful if you zoom out a bit and look at the kind of the Northeast corridor mega region, if you will, that stretches from the Boston area through Connecticut, through New York City, and into Eastern Pennsylvania. And if you look at that mega region area, you'll see that three agencies or regions in particular have really focused on warehousing. We'll go start in the Lehigh Valley. Next slide, please. So Lehigh Valley is in Eastern Pennsylvania. You can go to the next slide. Yeah, so Lehigh Valley is in Eastern Pennsylvania, and I think this is probably the region that's seen the most significant change, at least on the East Coast. Mostly, 20 years ago, mostly rural, maybe exurban, but over the past decade, they've seen just an explosive growth in warehouses in that region. And so planners and communities in that region have been really grappling with the impacts of warehousing in that neck of the woods. If you go to the next slide, please. And a little closer to home, for the Boston area, for example, the Metropolitan Area Planning Commission issued an excellent report in 2021 looking at the impacts of e-commerce in Massachusetts. Starting in 2021, going into 2022, the Regional Plan Association held a series of events and symposiums kind of looking at e-commerce and its impacts on the New York City tri-state metro area. Next slide, please. So if you zoom back out to see where the capital region in Connecticut as a whole fits into it, you'll see it's almost literally right in the middle. So the point of this study, or one goal of this study, is to really add to that existing knowledge base that these other organizations have done in their initiatives and their studies, because it's all part of one larger ecosystem. So we wanted this study to kind of add to that knowledge base. Next slide, please. And we informally started this effort in September 2023. CROG, CETUS, and Casio co-sponsored a joint event at the Windsor facility, the Windsor Amazon facility. We did a tour of the warehouse, and then we followed it up with a panel discussion and a presentation. Very well attended, and I think that that panel discussion and event really informed the scope as we drafted the scope of this study. Next slide, please. So, as to the study itself that we're going to discuss today, I would say there are three major goals we wanted to get out of it. We wanted to evaluate how does warehousing impact transportation, land use, and economic development in the capital region specifically. Two, if you're a state, regional, or local policymaker, what are the critical facts? What's the essential information you need to make informed decisions about this sector? And three, if you're at the local level, if you're a local planner, if you're in a land use commission, what do you need to do to assess development applications? If a warehouse developer comes to your community, what are some best practices you need to be armed with so you make the best decision for your community? Next slide, please. And there's several deliverables for the study, but I'd say they're basically categorized into three major buckets. The first one is a market analysis. What are the demand drivers? And more importantly, where in the region can you realistically expect warehouse developments to be proposed? The second one is traffic analysis. We wanted to get better, accurate on the ground information to better model regional freight travel demand, last mile impact deliveries, and reviewing the needs for truck parking in the region. And lastly, again, we want to look at best practices for land use. So when a warehousing development comes to your desk, to your community, how can you best evaluate it to get the best results for your town? Next slide, please. And I'll just close with this by giving a shout out to our project advisory committee, officials from Bloomfield, East Granby, East Hartford, Enfield, Manchester, South Windsor, Wellington, and Windsor. These communities, just given their location in the region, are on the front lines of a lot of these developments. They have a lot of experience, they have a lot of insight, and that was really invaluable to the process in developing and finalizing the study recommendations. So I just wanted to give them another shout out and a round of thanks for that. And with that, Stephanie, I will turn it over to you.
Excellent. Thank you, Kyle. So I'm going to introduce, throughout the presentation, I'll introduce in between the sections the members of the project team who are going to be presenting each section. So first up is going to be Dr. Charles Warren from the WSP team. Charles is a real estate and economics finance specialist with 20 years of experience. He mainly looks at applying data analysis and modeling to advance transit-oriented development. He previously led consulting work at Cushman & Wakefield and was a partner at Haybrook West, where he helped clients turn market insights into actionable strategies. He holds a PhD in city and regional planning from the University of California, Berkeley. So take it over, Mr. Warren.
Thanks very much, Stephanie. To begin to understand the drivers of trip generation and traffic analysis, we needed to start with figuring out how much stuff in terms of warehouse and distribution real estate has been developed and how much to look toward in the near future to give us a sense of understanding of what types of impacts to expect over the next 5 and 10-year time horizon. When we think in terms of markets, we like to begin with the regional economy. So businesses that are thinking of occupying logistics and warehouse space, developers who are thinking of building it, think to themselves first, the greater capital region is a hot market. Let's think about developing there. Then begin to look where in the capital region things seem to be happening, and then begin to narrow down to their site. We take a similar approach in understanding the regional analysis. As Kyle mentioned at the top of the presentation, the region fits into a larger mega region that stretches from Boston to New York into Pennsylvania. Within that, we looked at the capital region and divided it into the areas that you can see on this map. Each group of towns were collected into a section. We have that we have named south of Hartford, east of Hartford, Tallinn County, west outlying. Most of the focus for this study being around Bradley Airport is centered on the collection of towns north of Hartford that you can see in the dark blue. Our following graphs and charts will take a look at each of these sub-portions or what we call sub-markets of the capital region, and the color coding will generally hold. So this map is a helpful reference for what part of the region we're talking about as we go. Let's move on to the next. First of all, thinking in terms of how the capital region fits into the larger mega region. At the left side of each graph, it represents the number 1, which is how much square footage of industrial property each market contained as of the year 2014. So while some markets like Lehigh Valley or New Haven might be larger in size, they're all scaled to this 1 to represent the beginning. You can see the incredible pace at which Lehigh Valley area has grown since its base in 2014. In comparison, we have Scranton and Harrisburg also growing. The capital region, Hartford, in the thick red line, is more or less keeping pace with some of the other portions of the Northeast mega region, as opposed to being a section of mega growth. So there's no denying that an immense amount of growth has happened in the industrial and warehousing real estate sector. A lot of new stuff has been built, but that growth pace is dwarfed in a number of areas that are part of the larger mega region. When we focus in on the Northeast and set aside Pennsylvania, you can see that Hartford is actually outpacing the regions that are in New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, Massachusetts, et cetera. So there's no denying that a huge amount of growth has occurred in our region. And with that, let's head on to the next slide. So we all survived from 2020 to 2022. The major consequences of COVID, the pandemic, a lot of our work from home policies that created an immense amount of push forward demand for people to get home delivery when they were staying at home. A lot of warehousing space was built in 21, 22, and 23. It took that amount of time to respond to what happened in 2020 and 2021. After that, that big rush has sort of tailed off in 24, 25, 26. However, that just because the big wave of 15% a year has calmed down does not mean growth has passed. We're still looking at an additional 7% per year of square footage looking to be developed in the market. Most developers are looking to develop in the capital region because they want to figure out how to do deliveries into the Hartford and Springfield population centers. They are not necessarily looking to put nodes in a larger network to move goods across the country. It really is trying to figure out how to deliver to folks in the region. That means that economic development, job growth, and new activity happening in the capital region is spurring the demand for new development and new growth. They're definitely looking for access to existing utilities, to customer demand, and they are willing to pay a premium to have those sites. So this is not developers looking for the cheapest piece of land. They're looking for the best piece of land. They're willing to pay what they need in order to minimize their costs in creating new infrastructure and utilities to get there, and being the most efficient in truck miles in delivering from their warehouses to consumers in the capital region and in the greater Springfield area. One of the things that we most heard from developers that we spoke to as part of this study is that the review period for obtaining their permits is very, very long. The longer a developer is delayed, the more project costs, the more those costs get passed on to the consumer. So That is pretty typical thing to a complaint to hear from developers across sectors, across geographies, but they specifically cited state and national level as opposed to dealing with town governments for their land use approval, which they gave generally very high marks to. We'll head on to the next slide. Doing a quantitative analysis of the past 40 years, we can see that the north of Hartford region, which is in the dark blue, starts off the skinniest at the left side of the graph and grows the most toward the right side of the graph. It tells us really that the area around Bradley Airport is most in demand. They can access the airport. They have good access to deliver to residents throughout the capital region and north into Springfield region into Massachusetts. So we can understand why they would be primarily looking in those markets. However, all of the subregions around the capital region have seen some new warehouse development, even though those who have been really seeing the most of it have been Suffield, East Granby, Windsor Locks, Windsor, expecting folks to have their local experience probably mirror this. Let's head on to the next slide. Within those towns, where have we seen the most growth? We have highlighted here in the purple color land that is currently zoned for business commercial office, and in the beige color land that is currently zoned for industrial. You can see in the green dots projects that have been completed that may be expanded or renovated. You can see in the red dots things that have not been built yet but are potentially in the pipeline. You can see from this map that developers are indeed most interested in the north of Hartford area and, of course, in South Windsor as well. That they are primarily searching for land and sticking to areas that are already zoned industrial. So they do indeed want to work with town development plans, town land use plans, and town master plans. They're continuing to propose where they can find developable space that is ready to go as a right development, previously zoned, well connected to the utility network, well connected to the road network, and absolutely well connected to the airport. So those are all big items. So we can see from these dots that Windsor, Windsor Locks, and South Windsor have definitely had to deal with almost an onslaught of proposals for new development. We can head on to the next slide. Okay, so that gives us a sense of where developers have been and where developers are headed, and I will pass it back to Stephanie for the next section.
Thanks very much, Charles. Appreciate it. For this next section on the traffic counts that the study team conducted here in the Hartford region and subsequent traffic analysis, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Sebastian Guerrero, who is a vice president and practice lead with WSP's National Freight Logistics Advisory Group. Dr. Guerrero's focus is on freight economics, planning, and operations, and he is a leading investigator into the impacts of e-commerce on transportation, having led national research studies and published on this topic. He's also assisted state and local agencies in developing policies, plans, and investments around e-commerce and warehousing. So Sebastian, I will turn it over to you.
Thanks, Stephanie. And apologies, my video's not on. I'm nursing a cold here, but I'll do my best. So traffic assessment, a key part of this study was to determine what the traffic impacts are of this warehouse growth that Charles talked about. And so we want to know what types of vehicles are being generated from these warehouses, at what frequency, what times a day, and what that means for nearby neighborhoods. So the first thing we did was to look at the literature on estimating traffic from warehouses. We identified a few gaps, which I'll get into, but then we had the opportunity to collect our own data for the types of traffic that is being generated from warehouses in the Hartford region. And then we used that data to estimate trip generation rates. Next slide. So, just a quick overview of some of these gaps in the literature. As many of you know, the main source for estimating traffic from different facilities or land uses is the IT Trip Generation Manual, which is great for many purposes. But when it comes to warehouses, the data is more limited. And most of it is coming from a few dozen warehouses, mostly in the West Coast. And the results are tend to be older as well. It also assumes in its recommendations of how to predict traffic that you have a linear relationship between the size of these warehouses and the type of traffic generated. And we found from the literature that is a limitation when you're trying to predict how much traffic these facilities are creating. So one of the things we had the opportunity to do is to collect data from warehouses in the region. And if you could go to the next slide, it visualizes what this looks like. So we installed time-lapse cameras, actually not time-lapse, just regular cameras on public right-of-way outside of 16 warehouses in the region. And these cameras were looking not just for the big 18-wheelers, but also for vans, for single unit trucks, and even passenger vehicles, which could be a lot of the traffic generated from these types of facilities. The cameras also recorded motorcycles and transit buses as well. Next slide. So let me just show you a couple of results so you get a feel for what type of data we were able to collect. These charts here show the number of entries, so number of vehicles going into these facilities. Two specific facilities actually throughout the day. And the chart on the left shows an Amazon facility that's quite large. And you can see that the traffic is very regular. You have these very distinct AM and PM peaks. And also there's kind of a peak around lunchtime as well. And most of this traffic is actually passenger vehicles. So you can see those distinct tours and work shifts when they're starting, when they're ending. And you have a lot of traffic that's leaving those facilities at very exact times a day. And that could lead to some very specific traffic impacts. So it's not just the number of trips that are generated per day, but if all those trips are leaving at the exact same time, that's overwhelming intersections, turning lanes, and even gas stations, in the vicinity of these facilities. In contrast, you could see another data we collected here on the right for a more traditional warehouse. And you can see arrivals, departures pretty much are coming throughout the day. They're peaking around noon. Most of this traffic, I think if you Stephanie, click one more, we have one more bubble pop up here. Yep. So most of the traffic out of these traditional warehouses ends up being larger trucks, so either single unit or combination trucks, while some of the e-commerce warehouses, a lot more of the traffic are these passenger vehicles. And passenger vehicles is not necessarily only workers. It could also be Amazon Flex, right? There's these crowdsourced delivery services where vehicles are coming in and out frequently throughout the day. Okay, so what are the key takeaways from this analysis? So first, different types of warehouses generate different types of traffic. And we broke down warehouses into four types. You can see them at the table here at the bottom, and I'll explain what this table is showing in a second. But essentially, we have two types of warehouses. There's direct-to-consumer warehouses. These are serving e-commerce logistics and e-commerce supply chains. We've divided these into middle mile. So these are fulfillment center facilities primarily, and also last mile. These are the last types of warehouses before vans, tours depart to deliver goods to people's homes. The other types of warehouses are non-direct to consumer. These are shipping to restaurants, to commercial establishments, to stores. These we've broken them up into either dry warehouse, these are traditional warehouses, or cold storage. And each of these four different types of warehouses has very different traffic generation. And it's also important. Another key finding is it's important to not just look at trucks. Often we talk about warehouses, we think large trucks, but in many cases, most of the traffic that's being generated are vans or passenger vehicles, and it is important to consider that traffic generation as well. An additional finding, again, it's not just enough to think about how many trips are being generated throughout the whole day. You need to think about those peaks and are the work shifts ending at a certain particular point in time and everybody is being released at the same time. That's going to have a very different traffic impact on the network than if everybody is coming in and leaving facilities uniformly throughout the day. And then finally, we found that for direct-to-consumer logistics warehouses, they generate about the same amount of traffic on weekends as in weekdays. A lot of traditional traffic engineering and the IT manual really focuses on weekday traffic generation, which is where you have most congestion. But for some of these facilities, they're running 24/7 and operating even at higher levels on Saturdays and Sundays than during the week. And then just to briefly discuss this table here at the bottom, for these four different types of warehouses, we've developed recommendations for what are the variables that you should consider when trying to predict traffic at these types of facilities. And the columns in this table represent passenger vehicles, vans, single unit trucks, and combination trucks. And what we find is for direct-to-consumer logistics warehouses, the size is really the best predictor here, the square footage. For last mile of DTC warehouses, a linear function of that square footage. So as you double the square footage, you get roughly about twice as much traffic being generated. That ends up being a pretty good approximation. However, for these middle mile warehouses, they don't have a linear relationship. So as you double the square footage, the traffic generated is less than double. And that's because these middle mile facilities have a lot of other processing functions. They process returns. They also hold inventories. So the traffic doesn't scale linearly with their size. For traditional warehouses, square footage is a good predictor for daily passenger vehicles. But really the number of docks, so this is the number of doors that trucks back up into to make and pick up deliveries, that ends up being a much better predictor for van single unit trucks and for combination trucks. And for cold storage, really docks is definitely a better variable for predicting traffic. The number of docks is not something that is frequently used to predict warehouse traffic. It's not one of the things that the IT trip generation manual tracks, for example. But again, we found that in our data collection that it is superior for these types of warehouses than just focusing on the employment or the size of these facilities. Stephanie?
Thanks very much, Sebastian. So for this next section, I'm going to turn it over to a study team partner from the firm RSG, Ali Ahmadi, and he's going to talk about the delivery patterns dashboard that his team put together for CROG, which is live on the study website. And I think there's a couple of links in this presentation to that for folks after the fact to find this tool. And so for a little background, Ali is a senior analyst with 9 years of academic and industry experience, focusing on transportation planning, big data analytics, GIS, web app development, and VMT analysis. He has led and contributed to projects for cities, agencies, and private developers through California, New York, Alaska, Connecticut, and Hawaii. So Ali, I'm going to turn it over to you.
All right, thanks, Stephanie. I am going to share my screen here quick. All right, thanks, Stephanie. And I will briefly walk through our planning level e-commerce home deliveries dashboard that we have here. This dashboard provides an interactive look at major e-commerce fulfillment and distribution centers in the region. And here we're going to be focusing on the last mile delivery patterns, the land use context, and the planning level, estimating a planning level VMT based on available data. And I want to emphasize that this is a planning exercise. The estimates rely on the data that was available. And some of the inputs are based on national averages, and their inputs based on any public data that we had access to. So the analysis that we have here does not account for every factor that impact the last mile delivery and e-commerce, but just used as a kind of a guideline as a guide for planning discussions. So the tool here, there's an introduction section and there's a methodology that goes into more detail. So I will just quickly say that this method that we have used here is mathematical model that's for calculating the e-commerce, not e-commerce, but just generally travel distance associated um, to trips based on number of points, number of stops, the capacity of the delivery vehicles, and location of the facilities. And in this analysis, we have used census tracts as our unit of our analysis. And one other thing I would mention just quick here is that the estimates that we have here are weighted using assumed market shares for major last mile carriers in the region. And those include Amazon, USPS, UPS, FedEx, and Walmart. And there are other facilities that provide the same service, but based on the quick research that we did, these are basically, these five are contributing to the bulk of the e-commerce and deliveries in the region. And a last point here is that the delivery demand also was estimated using the national average for package delivery trends, and the numbers were adjusted roughly for e-commerce growth and also the inflation based on the data we had available here. So I will go quickly to the next page, which shows basically on the left side, we have the different land use contexts that we have been aggregating the data into. So we have business district areas, urban and suburban areas, industrial areas, institutional uses, and we have the residential areas that are separated into higher and lower density areas. And then on the right side, you can see the map that shows the distribution of these land use categories and across the region. So just as used as one of the background layers for our analysis. I will go to the next page, which is the last mile VMT analysis. So this page shows the estimated last mile delivery VMT from those major facilities as shown in the blue markers on the map. And the results are mapped by census tract here, and this allows kind of the user to kind of see how the travel distance from these facilities can vary across the region. So in this example, I have selected the all categories, but if you look at this drop down, it could also be seen for any of these five major distributors. But under the all categories, you can see the aggregated from all these facilities together. And the darker areas basically indicate higher VMT per our unit of analysis here, which is per 1,000 delivery that's estimated from this model. But again, these are planning level estimates, so not any VMT numbers should be interpreted as an exact value or facility specific impact. And the purpose is to basically support kind of a regional comparison analysis, identify broad patterns, and just inform early stage planning discussion. And then on the next page, I will just quickly go over this page here that this page uses the analysis that we had from the previous page. And by adjusting the slider on the left side, the user can identify census tracts where this analysis has estimated VMT per deliveries to be higher compared to the rest of the region. So some of these areas may be, for example, candidates for further study or targeted strategies for recommendations in a more focused study. So if I switch this from 85th percentile to 50th percentile, so it would kind of show how much of the population are highlighted on the map are experiencing e-commerce delivery longer than rest of the region. Overall, this dashboard is just another toolbox, another tool in the toolbox that provides a data point for understanding last mile delivery patterns in the region. And the future efforts could expand the methodology to incorporate additional parameters related to e-commerce, parameters related to shopping behavior, specific facility operations, and other factors to improve the accuracy and effectiveness of this analysis. With that, I will pass it back to Stephanie for next section.
Excellent. Thank you, Ali. Let me share my screen again here. And Ali, confirming you don't need me to stay on any of the slides
Yep.
for your section?
Those were for backup, so very good.
Okay, thank you. So going forward, I'm going to turn it over to another member of the WSP team, Charlie Romanow, who is a senior planner in our New Jersey office. Charlie is experienced in freight planning, stakeholder communications, multimodal planning, complete streets, and grant writing. In addition to contributing to freight planning projects across the country, Charlie serves as a planning board chair of his municipal planning board and as a co-chair of the Delaware Valley Regional Planning Commission's Regional Safety Task Force.
Okay.
So I'm going to turn it over to Charlie.
Okay, thanks, Stephanie. So when we talk about truck parking, we're mainly talking about two distinct truck parking needs, two type of needs. The first is staging parking, that is trucks arriving to their destination early that are waiting to pick up or to make a delivery. Some warehouse facilities, including those in Central Connecticut, do not allow trucks onto their property until a specified time window. This forces these trucks to find somewhere to wait for a couple of hours for their assigned time slot. The second type of truck parking is overnight parking. The Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration has strict rules concerning how many consecutive hours drivers can operate trucks, as well as how many hours in a week they can drive a truck. These rules improve safety by giving truck drivers a break, but it also means that when drivers are nearing their hours of service limit, they need to find a place to stop, park, and rest. Too often this happens in undesignated locations such as highway off-ramps and shopping centers. A third subtype of truck parking that we heard about from planners in the CRCOG region is that truck drivers are parking their cabs overnight on the street near their homes. Methods of addressing overnight parking can potentially also address this overnight cab parking issue. Next slide, please. So we looked at the Connecticut Department of Transportation's 2023 truck parking study, which looked at truck parking throughout the state. And we looked at this to better understand the existing conditions of truck parking. So the study forecasted truck parking needs out to 2040. They're projecting an increase in overnight parking demand in the CRCOG region, most notably an increase in demand along I-91 south of Hartford where the demand would exceed the supply of truck parking. And then I-84 east of Hartford and I-91 north of Hartford are also expected to see increased demand, although not to exceed capacity. This aerial photo shows the TA Travel Center in Willington off 84. In addition to having space for 240 trucks, the facility also has restrooms, laundry, fuel, food, and repair services. And this brings us to a discussion of best practices and strategies for accommodating truck parking. So with the growth of warehouse development and e-commerce, truck parking has become a concern across the country. These are just a few of the jurisdictions that have used their zoning codes and ordinances to regulate on-site truck parking. Upper Macungie Township in Pennsylvania's Lehigh Valley requires one off-street truck parking space per loading dock, plus a staging area for every 2 loading docks, ensuring that there's space for trucks to wait before loading and unloading. The Atlanta Regional Commission, Atlanta's MPO, provides guidance distinguishing temporary truck staging, overnight parking, and longer-term storage. And York County, Pennsylvania provides a model ordinance for its municipalities, requiring queuing and staging spaces as well as driver amenities at its truck parking facilities. Next slide, please. So this brings us to truck parking design and strategies. There are a number of design features and aspects that municipalities can consider in their zoning ordinance to ensure that warehouses and truck parking facilities adequately address truck parking needs and do not become a nuisance or eyesore. I'll highlight a few of these. It's the one that are in the kind of blue that stands out more, including visual screening and setbacks to minimize visibility of the facility from the roadway, providing downward-facing lighting fixtures to promote safety while reducing glare, restricting truck parking facilities from designated scenic roads, and requiring developers to provide a truck routing plan with adequate signage to make sure that the trucks are not only able to get to the warehouse without having to go through a residential area, but can get to any truck parking facilities without having to take any undesignated routes. Next slide, please. So as part of the study, we've recently been in touch with Connecticut DOT and have learned that they are pursuing expanded truck parking at the Southington West area on I-84, broadening it. The plan is to broaden it from 17 to 47 spots. Additionally, Connecticut DOT is investigating providing new truck parking in Vernon and Enfield. As part of this warehousing land use traffic study, we identified some parcels across the CROG region that could potentially be attractive sites for truck parking. These sites can be further vetted in future studies if additional supply is needed beyond what Connecticut DOT is pursuing. I'll now turn it back to Stephanie.
Excellent. Thanks very much, Charlie. So for the last presentation segment of the day, I'm going to turn it over to our team partners with BJH Advisors. We have Asher Hoyt on, who's an analyst at BJH, where he has supported redevelopment strategies, environmental review, public-private development proposals, residual land value modeling, and downtown revitalization planning. Asher holds a Bachelor of Science in Urban and Regional Studies from Cornell. And we also have Michael Miola on, who is a senior principal at BJH. His practice includes economic development, transportation infrastructure, planning, and advisory on public-private partnerships. Michael has contributed to BJH's work for New York City's City of Yes for housing opportunity rezoning and its proposed zoning special permit for last mile delivery facilities, for the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey on redevelopment of the Manhattan Bus Terminal, and for the State of New York on Moynihan Station and Pennsylvania Station. Michael holds a JD from Suffolk University Law School and a MSRED from Columbia. I'll turn it over to Asher and Michael.
Yeah, thanks, Stephanie. Hello all, Michael Miola, BJH. Asher will be on in a moment. We're going to try, so we took on doing the best practices guide. I'm going to try to go through this fairly quickly. I'm going to introduce it and then turn most of it over to Asher. I'm going to come in at the end again. So the best practices guide was based on evaluation of existing conditions in the CROG region, analysis of some existing facilities, interviews with sector participants, especially the planning professionals in the towns that have experienced most of the development of new warehouses in the last decade or so. Also, we looked at zoning code and other regulations, for several towns, particularly the ones that have had experienced the most development activity. They have actually have some really excellent provisions in this section, in this area. Windsor, Windsor Locks, East Windsor, Enfield, and Bloomfield, to mention a few. And then we did benchmark research. And we can go to the next slide. One of the things that we were asked to do was to prepare some case studies of siting of new warehouses. And the way we looked at it was on a national, regional, and local basis. The case studies are in the in the best practices guide, and really the idea there was to lay out the processes that regulated them and some takeaways from each of them. So we did a national best practice, which is a large 1 million-square-foot Amazon fulfillment center in Beaumont, California. The regional one is actually even larger. I think it's 2 million square feet in Andover, Mass. And then the local one is a Win Stanley Logistics Center in Enfield. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Asher to walk us through the first 9 of the 10 best practices we identified, and then I'm going to come back in for the 10th. Asher.
Thank you, Michael. So to start with our first best practice, we have clear definitions and use classifications. So here we're saying that it's a best practice for town zoning regulations to differentiate between warehouse uses and regulate accessory truck parking distinctly from primary operational use. So there's different types of facility uses that can create very different truck patterns, staffing, and neighborhood impacts. So when towns have clear, consistent definitions, they can apply the right buffers, studies, conditions to the right subtype. And this avoids a case-by-case, guesswork. It also shortens review and improves enforcement. So for these, we use the town of South Windsor zoning regulations as the example because they had some really great examples for various types of facilities. And we're just highlighting sort of examples of some of the major uses that we're seeing in this area here, the warehouses, distribution centers, and last mile delivery facilities. So we in the actual best practice guide, we took that language and we lay it out in more detail. And I'll move to number 2, please. So the second best practice is flexible zoning for adaptive reuse. So here, we found that we know that demand cycles can shift quickly. So industrial zoning should allow for facilities to adapt in terms of tenants or operating models without requiring new approvals for just routine shifts, as long as it's within a defined performance envelope. So zoning can allow for facilities to be designed and entitled to accommodate multiple tenant profiles and changing operational needs. They can also include floor plate and site systems designed to support future adaptation, which can be easily partitioned or demisable for leasing to multiple tenants. Zoning provisions can also make flexibility an allowed outcome in certain areas, such as through flexible loading and banked parking capacity. Not just an exception, allowing buildings to adapt to the market and stay productive without hearings for every change. Towns can also require adaptive reuse readiness in site plans and have post-occupancy monitoring plans to ensure adaptive reuse is aligned with zoning and approvals. So the outcome here is that buildings can follow the market rather than vice versa. And for this example, we include the Win Stanley Logistics Center in Enfield, which is also one of our case studies. And so there's sort of a good example there for this. Number 3, please. So our third best practice is transparent incentives and benefits. Here we suggest that deal terms should be presented in clear public-facing language with benefits and mitigations tied to specific milestones, so commitments are easy to track and enforce. In our example, the city of Beaumont, California, paired environmental review and planning commission hearings with a statutory development agreement or DA for development agreement, and various project conditions. We should note here that Connecticut doesn't currently have the enabling legislation to allow for development agreements of this type, but they can still use conditions of approval, post-development summaries, and have milestone-linked requirements, such as before a certificate of occupancy is issued. Towns can publish a summary of the or in Beaumont, they publish a summary of the development agreements, incentives, and obligations in terms of the tax abatement and long-term local commitments. They also tied incentives to specific measurable benefits, such as jobs and infrastructure improvements, and also conducted through a strong public engagement process, multiple hearings, provided bilingual notices, which is a great best practice to make things more transparent and publicly available. And then the outcome here is that there's better clarity for the public. They know what they're getting out of the deal, which can be really great for public opinion of facilities. Next, please. Number 4 is regional coordination on traffic impacts. So, heavily traveled truck routes can cross town lines and affect communities in different towns than the town that the facility is located in. So to use shared benchmarks and referral protocols so that traffic assumptions, routing expectations, and mitigation responsibilities are consistent across the region is one of our key best practices. This ensures that one town's approval doesn't become another town's problem and helps to codify routing and staging for trucks. Conditions can be amended based on monitoring, such as if volumes exceed forecasting, and it helps to push for more accurate forecasting through this process. CROG can potentially require a regional coordination memo, which documents referrals, agency feedback, and responses. And we'd also recommend as a best practice that CROG could potentially create an intertown referral checklist for projects that do touch regional truck routes. Once again, for this example, we referenced this specific Amazon facility in Beaumont, California. That's one of our case studies, because they provided a structural regional traffic review as required under their specific plans mitigations. But this could also be done with conditional approval. Next, please. Number 5 is community integration through design standards and sustainability measures. In order to reduce a neighborhood conflict with clear enforceable site and building design standards paired with practical sustainability measures that help to improve performance. This could be implemented via an overlay district specific to the development, and can include standards or requirements for visual screening, architectural articulation, dark sky and inward oriented lighting to improve impact on the community, truck circulation and staging plans, stormwater landscape integration, comparative visuals, comparing by right and proposed visuals, prescribed operations envelope with monitoring capabilities. And then in terms of sustainability, sort of an all electric or low carbon envelope, community solar panels held on the roof, and adaptive reuse and waste reduction retrofits. It can also include menu-based sustainability points and have special permit triggers. For this, we looked at our regional case study, which is the Amazon Robotics Fulfillment Center in North Andover, Massachusetts, which again, we detail more in the best practice guide. Next, please. Number 6 is a truck routing and staging management best practice. For this, towns can require enforceable routing plans and on-site staging capacity so that truck activity stays on intended corridors and off of community streets. Also pointing out here that Connecticut does not currently have enabling legislation to allow for community benefits agreements. But without a CBA, towns could still incentivize truck staging and management plans via conditional approvals. For this, through additional conditional approval, towns could require facilities to provide on-site capability or on-site capacity for all of the facilities' parking needs, and also conduct post-occupancy traffic monitoring. We at CROG could potentially help coordinate with municipalities and the state to identify and appropriately zone or encourage shared truck centers along these regional corridors. Next, please. For best practice 7, we have entitlement integrated with infrastructure improvements. So for this, towns can reduce their fiscal risk by linking discretionary approvals or scale and height relief, as an example, to timely delivery of defined infrastructure improvements, such as off-site utilities or road upgrades. This strategy makes growth pay for growth and can be done via a CBA, such as in the North Andover example, or conditional approval, as can currently be permitted in Connecticut, that requires the developer to fund and deliver offsite utility extensions. In North Andover, additional traffic and public realm commitments were also tied to milestones leading up to a certificate of occupancy. As part of the conditions, towns could require cost estimates and financial securities, such as a performance bond to ensure financial security. The outcome here is that growth is matched with upgrades sized to model demand and aligning private investment with public need. Number 8, please. So best practice number 8 is developer-led adaptive reuse planning. For this, towns can encourage long-term viability by asking developers to plan how a facility could be re-tenanted or repurposed, with triggers for re-review if operations exceed approval. This could involve procedural commitments for re-review if operations shift, and incorporate industrial district categories that permit flexible uses as market conditions change, similar to business park industrial concepts, which we also detail. This can require adaptability in design, such as demisable floor plates, cross dock, or dual loaded potential, and other adaptable design features. And then if operations ramp up, you could have right size mitigations so that data triggers so with counts at 6 or 12 months allow for targeted add-ons such as banked parking and added wayfinding or signage, depending on potential operational increases. And then the outcome here is that it just promotes continuity of use, but within a model that's financially feasible for a developer, as they're suggesting some of these components. And then number 9, please. Number 9 is post-occupancy performance audits and fiscal impact verification. So for this best practice, towns could require a post-occupancy operational or community impact monitoring and basic fiscal check-ins so that communities can verify development outcomes and adjust approved operational conditions if needed. So communities could monitor impacts and track fiscal benefit outcomes to verify the public return. They can do this through conditional approval, where they can build in monitoring from day one and help to close the gap between the projected and actual impacts. They could also set clear thresholds and remedies for impacts, require a monitoring plan, pre-negotiated corrective action menu, and include a fiscal verification template, which helps to have a simple table for annual reporting. For this, CROG could host a shared data set of post-occupancy results to help with benchmarking and visibility for these out from these audits. And with that, I'll turn it over to Michael for our last best practice.
Thanks, Asher. And then for this one, an indirect source rule, we thought this is really a national best practice. It's been adopted several years ago in California in the South Coast Air Quality District surrounding Los Angeles, which is the largest, mainly importer of goods in the country, and has a very, very large and highly developed warehouse market. What an indirect source rule would do would be to treat large warehouses as indirect emitters of air pollution, and would seek to regulate them and provide a menu of options such as fleet electrification, electric charging, and other solar panels and other improvements that would address indirect source from these warehouses. It would need to probably have to happen at the CROG regional level. But it really would have a lot of benefits for air pollution and other reasons. Yeah, and with that, those are the 10 best practices that we put forward in the guide, and we're of course always happy to take questions as needed.
Thanks very
right.
much, Michael. Oh, I'm gonna turn it over to Kyle to wrap us up.
Sure. Thanks, Stephanie. Yeah. So most of these deliverables that these folks talked about are already available on the website. There's a few that are like 99% done and are in progress to be done. Stephanie can speak to the final report and executive summary in a second here. But for the most part, they can be found on our website, which I will post in the link. And Stephanie, can you just speak to the executive summary and final report, kind of timing a little bit?
Sure. So we are wrapping up a final report that's going to compile the results from the technical task. So that's going to be the traffic analysis and modeling task, the overall economic and real estate task. The best practices guide is its own standalone, but we're going to summarize it sort of briefly in the final report. And so that can serve as a tool for planners both in the CROG region to pull up when they have questions about how to handle things like warehousing applications, truck traffic, and the like, the implications and impacts of these facilities and developments. And it can also be used as a starting point guide for planners in other regions, especially other regions that have municipal zoning, like many of the states in the Northeast, where, it's really the town by town, and it's kind of a high burden on planners to try to reinvent the wheel every single time here. So it'll be a good starting point for that.
Great. Well, that's the bulk of the presentation, folks. Stephanie, if we want to go to questions. So folks, you can unmute, you can drop questions in the chat. We'd really like to hear from you. We've had great involvement from our project advisory committee over the course of this study, but if you're calling or watching from another part of the state, I'd be very interested in your experiences with warehousing developments, whether you're seeing or hearing the pressure, or you just have general questions about the project or the study itself. But happy to open up the questions. One in the chat is from Sonia. How did you achieve reaching someone at the logistics centers to interview? They're doing a study in the Mid-Atlantic and haven't had success getting in touch with someone from a center directly. Maybe that's a Charles question or a Stephanie question.
Best
Yeah, I think
advice.
that's a Charles question.
Best advice I can give you is to utilize warm leads. It's true that a cold email from somebody like me at WSP to a developer will often be shuttled straight into the spam folder and completely ignored. If you have a client who's working with these folks, or anyone in your network who might be able to reach out on your behalf and let you know that you're coming, that has a big piece of it that is helpful. Also, I guess please feel free to reach out to us as part of your network, and maybe we can be helpful if there are specifics in knowing who might be out there.
And I will say for this study, the project advisory committee members from the town, so the town planners and economic development leads, they were really helpful in connecting us with the right folks at the developing firms and kind of project specific folks.
I saw someone raise their hand. I don't know if you withdrawn it. Carmen, are you still there? You can feel
Hi,
free to
yeah, I'm
chime.
still here.
Yeah, go
Um,
ahead.
yeah, thanks for this great presentation. I'm coming from the Boston region, and I think something we see a lot here is a lot of sort of overlap between sort of our traditional industrial land use areas and where there's quite a lot of emerging demand for housing. Obviously, that's pretty extreme in the Boston area. But I'm just curious, looking at this north of Hartford region with sort of the new Hartford line transit project, did you all consider sort of any sort of relationship between, I guess, potential future transit-oriented development, um, planning pressures in some of those areas where that may kind of overlap with kind of the sort of pre-existing industrial land uses that might be sort of planned around like those rail assets that are already there? And is that something that came up at all in this study?
Yeah, Stephanie, that's a lot of the conversation we had with Jacob, right? About planning for the future and being flexible, towards other development opportunities. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, absolutely. So Jacob Knowlton at CROG really spearheaded this conversation about flexibility with the zoning codes and also looking at future use of these types of facilities. So Jacob, I don't know if you want to answer to that further.
Yeah, I mean, not much to it. I think obviously we were coming out of the pandemic where there was a lot of push for uh, postal services, I guess. And so I saw a high demand for that. But at the same time, knowing that market shift, wanted to pay attention to kind of making sure these kind of large developments were able to, or at least there was some discussion around becoming something else afterwards. Because it didn't really seem that that type of development would be conducive to that. Paying respect to the fact that it's hard to get new industrial land, I just kind of wanted to see a little bit of making sure that our planners were aware that maybe a best practice would be to have these conversations with whoever was applying to come in for warehousing developments. Um, but more so, I guess, it's a little different here. I know obviously in Boston, you're kind of constrained for space, where we're seeing, we obviously have housing demand everywhere as well, but where we're seeing warehousing development, I don't think it's too much along transit corridors and where we kind of had those conversations, for example, identifying truck parking spots, we were kind of paying attention to um, not repeating the pains of the past and putting our industrial sites next to our rivers and our trains, but instead kind of saving those spots for other potential developments. So when we were proposed with some spots for truck parking near a train line, we just kind of said, let's look somewhere else. But yeah, for the most part, it was just making sure that we were trying to stay flexible. And so if an industrial site were to lose its tenant, that it would be able to come into maybe commercial or I'm not sure residential capabilities there, but at least something else.
And just to add on, Carmen, I might recommend if you haven't already, reach out to the folks at MAPC that wrote that initial report in 2021. Really impressive team, really great report. They'll probably be a pretty good resource if you want to pursue that further.
Kyle, could I add just a little commentary on this?
Of course.
As somebody who also had the privilege to work on the Hartford Line NCT Fast Track TOD planning study, I would note that demand for what we refer to as industrial has really changed. Folks in the warehouse logistics space are looking for very large contiguous parcels very flat areas, and really strong connection into the highway and the airport network. A lot of the traditional industrial spaces, as mentioned earlier, are adjacent to rail and adjacent to streams and rivers. A lot of those parcels that are being considered for transit-oriented development are too small to really be considered for warehouse and logistics. Hopefully mixing in a manufacturing use like a small local carpentry shop or something like that could be considered for part of TOD, but it's not really land that's being targeted by developers for warehouse logistics who need a lot of parking, a lot of truck, a lot of floor plate, and good road access.
Thanks, Charles. Other questions? Questions, comments, observations? Here's one from Mark Brandt. We're seeing a lot of this kind of activity along the I-395 corridor in Eastern Connecticut, and this was very helpful. Thanks so much. Thank you, Mark. All right. Well, hearing no questions, going once, going twice. Okay, we can give you some time back, folks. We appreciate your time today. We're gonna post the recording on the project website at some point in the near future. Stay tuned for the final report summarizing all this material. Stay tuned for the executive summary, which will be a shorter, digestible document with a lot of graphics in it, very, very readable. We're gonna get that out the next month or so. And any questions, feel free to reach out to myself or the WSP team. Happy to answer questions. But thanks for attending today and have a great day.